Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Your Framework for Success, Introduction to JavaScript Testing at Scale. My name is Abigail Kurtzman, and I am a Product Marketing Manager at Saucelabs. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping notes so you know how to participate in today's event. You should see your Zoom webinar control panel at the bottom of the Zoom window. Please use the Q&A feature to submit questions for today's presenters. In addition to submitting your own questions there, you'll also be able to view and upvote questions submitted to other attendees. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. If you have any technical issues or need support during the event, you can contact us via the Zoom chat or email us at webinar@saucelabs.com. And then finally, I'd like to remind everybody that today's presentation is being recorded, and you'll receive an email with links to view the recording and slides following the event. So it is now my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. We've got Christian Broman, who is a staff software engineer at Saucelabs based out of Berlin. He's also a member of the Saucelabs open source program office and a WebdriverIO core contributor. And then we also have Daniel Graham, who is a senior software engineer at Saucelabs based in Vancouver. He's a UI testing enthusiast and formerly a full-time contributor to the Appium open source project. So with that, I'll pass the mic over to Christian to get us started.
Thank you, Abigail, and welcome everyone to the webinar. I'm excited that so many people around the world have joined us today, and that every one of you is excited about JavaScript like I am, and about all the test automation, space and all its different projects and frameworks that exist in there. While some folks from other languages might find it annoying that JavaScript has so many different tools to do this one thing, I, for one, celebrate that diversity because it creates so many new approaches to do that one thing, and it gives the user the freedom to pick whatever is best for them. But no matter what tool and framework is your favorite, the key component for really building any successful framework is to first understand how browser automation works in general. So let's have a look into how a click command in a framework actually ends up being a click command in the browser. To do so, I would like to start with a little recap and would like to talk about how browser automation has been around for a decade and how it has been developed over the last 15 years. It's all started with someone called Jason Huggins having the need to test an expense tool at ThoughtWorks. Back then, he wanted to make sure that his application works in IE that have been used by the business folks, that it works as well as in Firefox that was used by the developers. He called the tool that he has created Selenium, which probably you all know by now. A year later, someone else jumped into the scene claiming he has built a better tool that he called WebDriver. That person was Simon Stewart, and both tools over the years gained more and more usage and popularity to a point where Jason thought it would be an excellent idea to build a business out of it. So he founded Saucelabs in 2018. It was apparent that both tools work great, but they have their own limitation in certain areas. Selenium was running in a browser at that time and had problems with cross-origin policies and automation around the browser, something that we see similar in Cypress today. While WebDriver, on the other hand, had limitation around automation certain elements because it had difficulties to access those. So Simon and Jason got together and merged those both projects to join forces and provide the best possible automation experience at that time. With the years, it became clear that how automation should look like, and to ensure that a click on the button works the same in Chrome as well as in Safari. A group of people at the W3C created a working group to standardize that process. The goal was really to make the automation working the same in all browsers. And so they drafted that kind of standard with all the requirements in mind that people had when they wanted to test application back then. This created, of course, a lot of confidence and traction in the ecosystem which started to flourish and new tools were created. For instance, WebDriver-IO was released in 2011, and new tools like Appium brought the same principle to the mobile space. Then something interesting happened. The web kind of the web changes, and similar the way how applications are being built and delivered. What used to be a static web server delivering static web pages are now dynamic applications with written and frameworks like React, Vue, Angular, Svelte. It has also changed a lot. This has also changed a lot about the requirements that people had when they wanted to test the application. Suddenly, front-end and back-end became more and more decoupled, and people started to focus on front-end application only to test only their components rather than deploying the whole stack. In addition to that, with the continuous development of all the new web APIs, there were more and more use cases that people wanted to test. A lot of these use cases were not really focused in WebDriver and Selenium, and were also not focused when the people at the W3C created the standard. Luckily, we had companies like Cypress or DevExpress with TestCafe jumping into the scene and build some extraordinary tools to help us out, allowing to test those kind of use cases that developers would have when they build their modern web applications. So doing all these developments, actually the WebDriver protocol was supposed to solve everyone's problems. And eventually that protocol was finalized. However, it allowed only automation across all, while it would only allow automation across all browsers, the design was already behind. And it was clear that it wouldn't solve the problems that the developer would have building modern web apps. So always at the same time, a new effort was started to develop a new protocol with the experience and learnings that people made while creating the first ones and the requirements that developers now have when they build modern web application with React, Angular, or Vue. So after now more than a decade of automation tool development, I would like to open a poll. I would like to ask all of you how many different ways you think someone could automate a browser. So think about what kind of the different ways are, and I will resolve that answer after the next 5 slides. All right, so with this whole development, we now can pretty much group the tools that are out there in 2 buckets. We have I would call them conventional tools like Selenium or WebDriver-IO, and we have I would call the non-standard tools. And both groups have some interesting characteristics. Starting with the conventional tools. They all, as you might expect, using the WebDriver protocol and therefore allow you to truly do cross-browser and mobile automation testing. Every command that you run is tested in every browser, like every other standard standard requires it. However, given the way some front-end frameworks are built, it can still create some incompatibilities. As the design of the protocol, which originally was do everything a user can do, is not very suited for developers that like to introspect all the different areas of the application. These tools seem to be not popular among the developers, but are more used by QA folks. However, many of them are openly governed, open source projects with a long history and large communities, with WebDriver-IO being part of the OpenJS Foundation alongside with Node.js, Mocker, Webpack, and Selenium is a project of the Software Freedom Conservancy. On the other side, we have the so-called non-standard tools, which all have their kind of own ways to automate the browser and their own set of advantages and disadvantages over each other. These custom approaches are usually through web APIs or browser APIs. That makes all of them limited to that certain browsers they are running it. But more interesting to developers because the amount of automation capabilities are much larger. The interesting part of these projects are that they're all governed by companies with multiple people working full-time on them. We have Cypress, the developer Cypress company, Puppeteer, developed by Google and Mozilla, Playwright by Microsoft, and TestCafe by DevExpress. So if we put all these frameworks and tools now on the screen, we can see that we have Cypress and TestCafe that taking the approach mostly using web APIs, while Puppeteer and Playwright rely on native browser APIs. We have lastly then Selenium and WebDriver that are using the WebDriver protocol. What worth mentioning here is that some tools like Cypress or WebDriver actually use kind of a mixture of both approaches, of two approaches. For some automation capabilities, Cypress needs to use the browser APIs to take screenshots of the browser, for instance. And on the other side, WebDriver uses the browser APIs for its performance testing features and its integration to Google Lighthouse. So let's have a little bit more closer look at how browser can be automated in general. So there have been three common practices. I hope you all have them recognized by now, which are automating a browser through JavaScript and web APIs, through browser APIs, or through a browser driver that speaks the WebDriver protocol. So if we're now looking at the poll to see the results, we can see that we have 9% that think that there are only two, 12% that think there are three different approaches. There are 9% that think there are 5, 7% that are 7, and 63% that say it depends. Well, it depends is usually the right answer, but if I would have picked one of those numbers, it would be actually 3, which is again the web APIs, so the JavaScript sandbox in the browser, the browser APIs, for instance, Chrome DevTools, or the WebDriver protocol. I would like to explain a little bit more what these protocols are doing and how you can automate a browser with those kind of approaches. Starting with web APIs, I will talk about them first because I think those are the first generation of browser automation of a browser automation approach. Even though more of the novel tools like Cypress or TestCafe are using this approach, it has been actually around since the creation of Selenium, which was like Cypress back in the days, a test runner that was living within the browser. And in fact, some of the automation commands, like finding out if an element is visible, Selenium still injects JavaScript to find that out. And the reason for that is that defining what visible means is kind of complex in the standardization space. So it's difficult to standardize that in WebDriver. If you ever hear the term atoms around the Selenium projects, atoms are all these little JavaScript snippets that Selenium uses to automate something in the browser by injecting JavaScript. The advantage is here that being within the JavaScript sandbox allows you to have full control about the application and the environment your application is running in. And it allows you to run commands fast and reliable. However, it can only do as much as JavaScript and the web APIs can do, which is a lot, but it needs some workarounds. You need some workarounds to do some essential things like taking a screenshot, things like that. When using web APIs as an automated engine, you need to find a way to execute your automation script within the application that is under test. And here there are mostly two approaches. The one used by Cypress is where Cypress itself as a test runner runs within the browser, is being started in the browser, and the application under test is loaded within an iframe. So the test runner exchanges messages within the test runner outer frame and the application on the test within the frame. TestCafe uses a different approach here. They use a proxy to inject some JavaScript into the application on the test. Both of those approaches, general, are limited by the JavaScript sandbox. So again, Cypress and TestCafe both use some workarounds by accessing the browser APIs. The second generation of browser automation are the browser APIs. It's the second generation because it's also the approach of the original WebDriver project to automate a browser. So back then, the common way was to abuse browser extensions to trigger certain commands on the websites. For example, we have the Internet Explorer that used the COM interface that Microsoft provides for some automation capabilities. Today, though, browsers have evolved a lot. Their capabilities around automating and inspection has drastically increased, which we see with the Chrome DevTools being heavily used in the Chrome DevTools app, as well as in Puppeteer or Playwright. So you can not only use browser APIs to automate the browser, but also to inspect them. The problem with those browser APIs, again, they all work differently, and some of them aren't really well documented outside of the browser teams and the browser vendors. And in addition to that, they also change a lot from one version to another. Think about it as having 3 friends that offer you help, but all speak the same, a different language. With one friend being Safari, who doesn't really like to listen to you and hence has always its headphones on. To give all your 3 browser friends one task, you would need to understand and speak all their languages, which is why, for instance, tools that are built on top of Puppeteer or Puppeteer itself can only automate browsers that are based on Chromium. Luckily, today we see that browser vendors start to join forces here to speak some more similar languages, which is why you see now Puppeteer support for Firefox Nightly. And we also see former browser teams that are implementing custom adjustments to browser engines to allow you to do the same type of communication in all different kinds of browsers, which we see in Playwright. Lastly, we have the WebDriver Protocol, which I would argue being the 3rd generation, as it combines the previous 2 approaches to ensure a consistent automation experience across all browsers. So it is a web standard, which means it is actively developed by all browser vendors, and there are other parties involved, like Saucelabs, trying to support the working group building out the standard. It is also regularly tested, so all commands in the protocol are tested and needs to have tests in every browser. But as I mentioned before, the original design has kind of failed the requirements for testing modern web application. The way it works with the WebDriver protocol is, and many of them correctly refer to being slow and outdated, which is somehow right, because the reason why is that it needs a translation step between your framework and the browser or your target environment. So with the WebDriver protocol, you can think as your developer or test author are managing a browser factory. But of course, in these times with COVID, you have to work from home, and you don't have no telephone or internet to really manage your industry. So what you need in order to send some commands to your factory workers is you need to have an assistant that transmits your commands to that factory. And that of course can take a while, right? Because you can only afford one assistant, and that assistant needs to go to that factory to give the command to the workers and then come back and tell you if they have successfully executed. And sometimes that can take up to 200 milliseconds, especially if you run those tests in the browser. And on a busy day, you sometimes have over thousands of commands in a single test, which of course makes your test slow. This is obviously not the way to run a factory effectively. While single transaction is slow, this approach, however, has the advantage to be very scalable. We have at Sauce really efficient customers that run over 1,000 tests in parallel and therefore tremendously reduce their test execution times to a minimum. Another advantage here is that you can not only automate factories, browser factories, but literally any kind of factories. So, if you don't have a browser factory, you might have a mobile factory, and your assistant, understands iOS and Android. So you tell the same simple command to click on an element, let's say, to your assistant, and your assistant understands how to execute that command in the factory. So having this translator for a trivial command, like a click on a button in a complex user agent, works quite well. However, so this model, the WebDriver model of sending a single command through the internet and getting a single response back has been working quite well for the ecosystem and cloud vendors like Saucelabs for so many years. This, of course, this model, of course, only applies to the conventional WebDriver tools like Selenium or WebdriverIO. All the novel automation tools haven't been really able to be executed in a cloud environment like this until very recently. Also, with the new W3C working group delivering the new WebDriver protocol, the changes to that protocol will also be different to the model that it is right now. It will be somehow look like this. So instead of sending a single command, we will send a lot of commands and we will see a lot of responses. So instead of sending one command and get one response back, you can send a lot of commands and can listen to a lot of responses as well as events. So the new protocol will be a lot more event driven. The problem with that is that due to increase of the messaging, it will be really difficult to execute this in the cloud the same way. So for instance, if you think about running 1,000 tests in parallel with a lot of messages within one test being exchanged, it could end up DDoSing your own CI/CD server. So that we don't want that, right? So again, having this kind of model doesn't really scale, and that's why a lot of the cloud vendors, including Saucelabs, have been working on solutions to that. Therefore, I want to hand it over now to Dan, who will give you more insights about a new tool called SauceCTL, the Saucelabs Test Runner Toolkit, to help solve that problem. Dan, take it away.
Hi, thanks, Chris, and thanks for that presentation. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about and giving a demonstration on SauceControl or SauceCTL. So what is SauceControl? So SauceControl is a command line interface that we ship at Saucelabs that serves as a generic test runner for all of Sauce's test offerings. So SauceControl is a departure from the way that we've traditionally done testing. So traditionally, the way testing works in Saucelabs is that users write their Selenium tests, they point their Selenium tests to our Selenium service, and then their tests get run on our virtual machines. So with SauceControl, the concept of a session is out the window, and we have a new concept called batch testing. So if you could go to the next slide, Kristen. So batch testing, what does that mean? So instead of pointing your tests to a server and then running commands and sending commands to a virtual machine, what you're actually doing now is you're using SauceControl either like on your local machine or on a CI provider. And what SauceControl will do is it will bundle up your tests, send them up to our platform. And then our platform, you are provided with an array of different web browsers and different operating systems that you can run your tests on. So you have all the different major browsers, Safari, Chrome, Firefox, Edge, and then even old Internet Explorer. And then you can run them on Mac and Windows, and then you can run them on different you test on different screen resolutions, different viewport sizes. And then even for some frameworks, you can run your tests on iOS simulators or Android emulators and even real devices. So your tests get run, and then they get sent back as to your dashboard as test results. Okay, so I'll share my screen right now. Okay, so can everybody see my screen okay? I think, actually, I don't think so.
Looks good.
Can someone confirm? Okay, it looks good, Christian, thanks. Okay, so I'm going to just demonstrate this in action right now. The test framework I'm going to be demonstrating is Cypress, because that's the one that seems to be in the most demand right now and seems to have the most interest. So I'll go through that. So yeah, what I did is I created I have this repository. It's in my own personal GitHub repo. I'll just share this in the Zoom chat right now. So this is a example Cypress repository that I'm going to use to demonstrate how you can run your tests, your Cypress tests in Saucelabs. But this could be done with any Cypress project. So if you already have a repository that has Cypress tests, you can do it there, or you can just make your own repository, start your own Cypress tests, and then you'll get up and running. You can get up and running pretty easily or pretty quickly. So yeah, first thing is, so this repository already has Cypress tests, but I could show you how simple it is to actually just get started with Cypress. All you need to do is using npm install Cypress. So Cypress is installed. So this is Cypress 5.6. So it's one major version behind, but that's okay. So I'm just going to run the command Cypress run open, or Cypress open. And so what it just did now is it just popped up the tests that I have under my integration folder. Now, if you didn't have any tests, if this folder, so Cypress/integration, these are all the Cypress folders: Cypress fixtures, integration, plugins, support videos. If you don't have that already, Cypress actually will create a big list of integration tests and pre-populate it for you. In this case, I already have my tests ready. So these are the two tests I have here. So what I'm automating here with this repository is called saucedemo.com. Saucedemo.com is a website that we have at Saucelabs. It's a fake website that we created to do test automation. So we do Cypress tests, TestCafe tests, everything. We use this as our test case and our demonstration test. So there it is. Just going to log in here, and it's as you can see, it's a fake e-commerce site. So we just have our sauce products here. You can add to cart and all that, and we want to automate this website. So what I've done is I already have the tests in place for that does automation, so the Cypress tests. So I'm going to open that up, and I am just going to run a test right now. So basically, all you need to do is just click on saucedemos.spec.js or any of these tests, and it'll run that individual test for you. You pick the browser. So Chrome is fine with me, so I'm going to click that. And there you have the automation, your Cypress automations. And the test passed. So that's the interactive mode. And then the non-interactive mode for Cypress is you do Cypress run. I'm going to add this command line flag headed so that you can actually see the browser. And then, because if you don't set headed, if you just leave that, it runs it headlessly, which is nice. It's better for performance and good for running in continuous integration. I'm going to say browser, and then let's just say Edge, as in Microsoft Edge. There, the tests run again. So this time the test actually will finish. The last time the browser stayed open, this time it'll finish. And the results are printed out to our standard output. And we can see that this test passed. Okay, so that covers how you can run Cypress locally and how you can get up and running with Cypress. Now for this demonstration though, what we're going to want is we're going to want to actually register a Saucelabs account to get the tests running. To get the tests running in our actual cloud. So to get up and running, you just need to go to saucelabs.com and then you could click the try it free button and that will take you to the sign up page. And then you just put in your first name, last name, email, all this. You just fill out this form and then choose the data center you want to run in. So if you're in the Americas, you'd want United States. If you're in Europe or Asia, you'd want Europe. And then Australia is, yeah, don't use that yet. It's still early access. So you sign up your account. I already have my account, of course. So I'm just going to sign into mine. All right, so I'm already signed in. So I'm signed in. Now you need to add your credentials to your environment. So I'm going to set my username, export sauce username equals DANGR. And then sauce access key. So let me just shrink the window here. So you have to go to the user settings page here. I'm not going to scroll down because it shows the access key. But if you scroll down, you'll see an access key. And you want to copy the access key. And then you want to export it. So the sauce access key. And you'd say my access key, whatever that is. Okay, so I have my credentials set now. And so now the question, so now we have the credentials set. So we have our account set up. Now, how do we take our Cypress tests and ship them up to Saucelabs and get the tests running? So the next thing we need is, the tool that I was talking about called SauceControl. So SauceControl can be installed different ways. It can be installed using Homebrew, but I'll use npm. I think that's the simplest way. So npm install g SauceControl. Great. Okay, so SauceControl is ready. So now you can confirm SauceControl is present by SauceControl -- version 0.33.3. That's the latest one. So SauceControl is published in the npm repository. Okay, so we have SauceControl set up. So to get SauceControl set up, or so to get your project set up to use SauceControl, all you need to do is SauceControl new. And then you see here, you get to choose the framework you want to use. So there's Cypress, Playwright, Puppeteer, and TestCafe right now. We have it in our roadmap to expand that to other frameworks and even beyond just web testing frameworks. But so for this example, we're using Cypress, and I'm in Vancouver, Canada. So I am going to use US West 1. And it's going to ask me if I want to overwrite my Cypress JSON. I do not. Okay, now it's ready. So it created these new files for me. So this is the important one, the .sauce/config.yaml. So this is basically it's like a manifest. It's a configuration telling Saucelabs how we want to run our tests. So now that we have it, all I need to do is call SauceControl run. So you can see here, it's telling you what it's doing. So project archived and project uploaded. That means what it's doing is it's taking your project and it's creating the batch that we were talking about earlier. So it's bundling it up, sending it up to our servers. And then our server is provisioning our test to a virtual machine and then running the Cypress test. So I'm going to open it up in the dashboard. So this is just the login area, and it gives you a link here. Have a look. So it's showing a loading indicator right now. This just means that the test is running. When it's done, it'll show us a video, and it'll show us all of the assets and the logs that were produced by the test so that we can inspect it afterwards. Okay, there it is. So you can see the green check mark. You can see the tests are done. So these logs are the same as the logs that we saw earlier when I called Cypress run locally. So here's a video of what's going on. So this is a screen recording of our tests. So you can see it's the same Cypress test. The difference is that instead of it running on your local machine, now it is running on a Sauce VM. And so that's all well and good, but that's still only just one browser. So what's, you might ask, well, what's the benefit of using Saucelabs then? So the benefit is that you can get, with Sauce, you can get parallelism. So you can run multiple instances of our VMs and multiple instances of our browsers at the same time. So what I'm going to do is look at our config.yaml. So it has a thing called suites, which refers to each suite is a different instance of the test running, a different configuration of the test running. So right now, I only have Chrome. So what I'm going to do is I am going to make 3 copies of that. And what I'd like them to do is I want them all to cover a different web browser. So there's different ways you can parallelize your tests. You can parallelize across web browser. You can parallelize across operating system. And you can do things like, and you can set the screen resolution. So if you want to test your web application under different screen resolution that's supported. In this case, for just demonstration, I'm only going to look at cross-browser. So I have Chrome. I'm going to set this. The first suite is Chrome. I'm going to name, it needs to have a unique name, so I'll call it Chrome Web Test. Second one, we'll do Firefox. We'll call it Firefox Web Test. And then the third one, we'll test Edge Web Test. So sadly, right now, Cypress doesn't actually support Safari or WebKit testing, but they do have WebKit testing in the roadmap right now, but it'll probably never support Safari. So we'll call it Microsoft Edge. Okay, so I've saved the config YAML. Going to run the test again, and then I'm going to add this other flag called CCY, which stands for concurrency. So depending on the plan that you're registered on, you're given a certain amount of concurrency. That is to say, the number of tests or number of jobs you can run at the same time. So my concurrency plan, because it's an internal plan, is pretty high. So I'm going to set it to 5. Technically, there's only 3 tests, so 5 is actually more than I need. So, but I'm going to set the concurrency to 5. If you don't set the concurrency to, if you don't set concurrency, it's set to 2 by default. So I'm going to run it again. Now it's doing the same stuff that it did before, except this time it is running 3 tests. So you see Edge web tests, Chrome web tests, and Firefox tests. It does the same thing with the archiving the project once and uploading it once. But then now it's running it across 3 different machines. So I'm going to navigate to my dashboard, have a look at that. And now you can see 3 of them, 3 Cypress tests running at once. And since they're all the same test, but different browsers, albeit different browsers, the test should complete at around the same time because they're running simultaneously. So it's not like one waiting for the other. And then SauceControl gives you the status of the tests as you go. So there's 3 in progress. Okay, now 2 of them are finished. Now the 3rd one should finish pretty quickly. Okay, so now we have 3 different tests. Now we have Firefox, Chrome, and Edge. We have 3 different browsers all run simultaneously at one time. So if anyone wants to learn more about SauceControl, there is our site. Right now it's just staging, but it's docs.staging.saucelabs.net. And then we have this page for configuring SauceControl. I'll share this in the chat. And then here's the configuration instructions for Cypress. But we also have instructions for Playwright and TestCafe. Okay, and so that's it for my main presentation. I think we'll go into a question and answer period. If the question and answer period ends soon, though, I can, there's more stuff I can demonstrate, but I'd like to give like a long opportunity to do a QA. So I'm going to stop sharing and we'll move to QA first.
Awesome. Thank you, Christian and Dan, for that excellent presentation. We now have about 20 minutes for Q&A. So as a reminder for our audience, you can still submit questions through the Q&A button in the Zoom webinar control panel, but I will go ahead and kick us off with some of the questions that were asked earlier in the presentation. So Kim was asking, can Cypress handle PDFs that opens up in a Chrome pop-up window? How about if a page opens up in a new tab?
I can take this one. I think there's where Cypress has its limitation. While it can jump from one URL to the next when it's the same host, it cannot jump between windows, I think, and between different websites of different kind of hosts. So that's where the limitation of running in the JavaScript sandbox comes with. That's a problem. I think the Cypress team is working on that to allow that, eventually using the browser APIs for that.
Awesome. Thank you,
Yeah,
Christian. Dan, do you have, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just add quickly. So I'm adding a link to trade-offs so Cypress actually has a document that outlines all the different trade-offs of Cypress, so the things that it doesn't support.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Okay, so Herman asked, what is the recommended way to start a project which needs to cover all browsers out there?
What would you recommend, Christine?
To test all browsers, I would settle on a WebDriver-based one, because with WebDriver being a standard, it will allow you to test on all browsers, even in the cloud. And then it depends on what kind of frameworks you use, you like out there. I would always recommend to do a POC and try some of the existing frameworks out, and whatever your team likes to use the most is the one that will be used in the end.
Great, thank you guys. Chris was asking, will SauceControl have a plugin on Jenkins and/or integrate with the pre-existing Sauce plugin?
I believe we have that in our roadmap. but you don't need to necessarily wait for a plugin to use SauceControl in Jenkins. I mean, SauceControl, so it's a command line interface. So you can write like your Jenkins job and include your SauceControl commands in that.
Okay, Dan, I'd like to go back to a question that you had helped answer in the Q&A a bit earlier about any good approaches to mobile browser test automations that John asked earlier. And I know you answered a little bit there, but I can also read it again aloud for you if you need, but if you can kind of dive into that a little bit more, I think the rest of the group would.
Yeah, I could jump into that. So the question is, how do you do mobile web browser testing? So it depends what is meant by mobile testing. If you're talking about actually testing either iOS simulators, Android emulators, or actual physical real devices, as far as I know, at least the only two options are Appium and TestCafe. So now Appium is an implementation of Selenium. So Appium is a way you can run Selenium tests on mobile devices, and then TestCafe is another one that has plugins that let you test on that. Now, if you're talking about actually testing on mobile where you need access to, where you don't necessarily need the devices, but you need mobile APIs. Yeah, like Playwright, Cypress, and TestCafe have modes where you can set like the viewport and the resolution to emulate like the form factor of a mobile browser, and it has ways to emulate the APIs that only a mobile browser would use.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Dan. Okay, Darius was asking if we can standardize browser API, then where is the sense to continue with WebDriver Protocol?
That's a good question. I asked the browser vendors myself, and the problem here is that every browser vendors has a limited set of people that can work on the browser. And while Chrome has a lot, or Google has a lot of developers sitting on Chrome, there are not so many on Safari and not so many on Firefox for a variety of reasons. So, telling a Safari team to work on the same features as the Chrome team in their own implementation will definitely not work, as every browser vendor has their own priorities when it comes to the web browser. So that's why we decided that the WebDriver protocol is like a layer on top of a simplification of the browser APIs makes the most sense, because we can there decide what's the most important for our testing use cases, and don't need to implement a cross-browser API that comes with a lot of more features than the WebDriver API.
Awesome. That was super helpful. Okay, I've got one question that was from some of the pre-submitted Q&As. Can we use Selenium WebDriver written in Java? Will it work? What obstacles will we face? From Chris Brown.
Yeah, so Selenium Java, you can use the Java client to run your Selenium tests on our cloud right now. So that's something we've been supporting for a long time. So yes, we do support that. So we don't have batch testing for Selenium yet, though. So what I just demonstrated with SauceControl won't apply to the Java client.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So John was asking, we're using Nightwatch.js. Do we support that framework at Saucelabs?
Yeah, Nightwatch.js already works with Saucelabs, not with SauceCTL, because there's no need, because Nightwatch is based on WebDriver and therefore already works on our cloud as it is. So there's no real need to put it into SauceCTL. So yeah, it is supported.
Great, thanks, Christian. Okay, Herman was also asking, do you have a dashboard showing analytics of test case results?
Yeah, we do. So we have a page called like our insights page, which gives information on test results and test failures and that sort of thing. And that's something that's still, it's a work in progress right now. So we're adding more to that as we go, as we add more test frameworks.
Awesome, thanks, Dan. Okay, we had a few folks asking about what's the upper limit for concurrency?
So that depends on what plan you're subscribed to. Hey, Christine, do you know at the top of your head with the free trial account what it is? Is it just one?
The free trial account has 2, I think, or 3, 2 or 3.
Right. Okay. But yeah, just it depends on what plan you're subscribed to.
Yeah, there's plenty of options. Okay, Prithvi asked, would Test Runner Toolkit be extended to non-JavaScript frameworks, specifically WebDriver-based tests?
Yeah, that's something we've considered in our roadmap. So right now we've focused heavily on JavaScript because there's several JavaScript-based frameworks that have been emerging in the testing space, Cypress, TestCafe, Playwright. But we are considering supporting batch testing for non-JavaScript testing frameworks.
Awesome, thank you. John was asking that they noticed that Protractor was not mentioned after the timeline slide. As popular as this framework is there a reason it's not mentioned in the frameworks talked about?
Yeah, the Protector was not mentioned because, as far as I know, the project has been deprecated by the Angular team. I think there will be some news about that coming out from the Angular team soon. So that's all I can say about that. So it's for a long time, it hasn't been developed, and it will likely to be deprecated.
Thank you. We've got one that got a couple upvotes. How can you pass 3 different sets of data for 3 browsers if a user can't use the same data at the same time?
I'll do my best to try to understand that. So I pass 3 different sets of data for 3 browsers. So the demonstration I showed, I mean, if I'm trying to understand it correctly, if you're thinking about cross-browser communication, the browsers, yeah, they can't talk to each other. So my demonstration was that showing how you can run the same test on 3 different browsers at the same time. But yeah, there's no communication between the browsers.
I think I have an idea what this will be about. I think it's about data-driven testing, where you have like a set of data that you want to use for your tests. And in this case, when you have 3 different sets of data in 3 browsers, you want to ultimately run it on 9 different browsers, like in 9 sessions in parallel. And this is like one of those features that I think SauceCTL does not support yet. There are some ways you can do it in other tools like WebDriverIO. But if you have those kind of feature ideas, feel free to always go to the SauceCTL GitHub repository and send us a feature request, and the team will then look and prioritize this, and we'll put this in the roadmap.
Okay, I think I understand. So, but there are ways like you can use different Cypress configurations across the suite. So in my demonstration, I just showed like different browsers on the different suites, but you can actually pass different environment variables, and you can pass different configuration files. So you could have different code paths depending on the suite that's being run.
Awesome, that was super thorough. Thanks, y'all. So we've got about 6 minutes left, and I will probably cut the Q&A session short because we've got a few closing slides. But for this last question, this feels like a good one from Roy. What factors should we be considering when selecting a framework? And out of the frameworks covered in the seminar, is there one that stands out to them above the others?
Again, when it comes to picking a framework, everyone has their own advantages and disadvantages over the other. I think it would be go too far and too long to really use WebDriver before Cypress because of that. And I think ultimately what we have seen in the industry is that teams have been making POCs to see how, and writing 1 or 2 tests for one framework to see how it works with the team, how the workflow is, and if they like it, and then ultimately decide on one of those. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that was super helpful. Okay, we'll take one more from the Q&A. Let's see. Do any of these JavaScript frameworks support BDD, such as Cucumber?
Yeah, TestCafe, you can do that. And I think Cypress has, pretty sure, I can't promise this, but I'm pretty sure Cypress has plugins for PDD.
Thanks, Dan. I know that Susie just posted in the chat, but if we didn't get to your Q&A, we will be reaching out with some follow-up questions, and we also have an email in there. So we will try our best to get you as much information as we can. Now we're going to just do a couple closing slides for y'all so everyone can get back on their regularly scheduled part of their day. Give me 1 second. My computer just decided to freeze. Okay, so that's all the time that we have for today's webinar. And so thank you so much to Christian and Dan for coming and having this presentation with us. And thank you everyone for attending. We had a really good turnout and a lot of participation. We really appreciate it. So a few quick notes before we close. When you exit the webinar, you'll see a survey on the presentation. We'd appreciate it if you would provide your feedback on that brief survey. You will also receive a follow-up email shortly with links to view the recording and slides from today's webinar. So feel free to review them or share them with your colleagues. And if you enjoyed this event, we hope you'll join us for our upcoming conference, SauceCon Online. We recently announced the full agenda and registration is now open at saucecon.com. And then finally, if you have any additional feedback on the Test Runner Toolkit or other testing solutions, our UX research team is looking for volunteers to join the Saucelabs UX research panel. You can see additional details on the slide here. And just please keep an eye out for more information in the webinar follow-up email you'll receive shortly. We'd love your participation in that. And then on behalf of Saucelabs, thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day. Give y'all a few minutes back.